Good evening, everyone. My name is Marco Sammicheli, and I'm the International Relations Chief Officer of Triennale. And this is the 7th episode of the conversation, A New European Bauhaus. This is a Triennale Milano bilateral meetings with the European cultural representatives in Milano and Roma. And it's a series of conversation that we decided to hold and stream live on the Triennale platform in order to collect positions, reflections, critiques, and ideas around the New European Bauhaus, a platform launched by the European Commission last October, and since then growing and growing online with different contributions. Since last time that we had a conversation with the friends and colleagues from Spain, we already had with Finland, with Czech Republic, with all Netherlands, France, Germany. Triennale became one of the official partners of the New European Bauhaus, and we are very proud to share this with you. But in the next 56 minutes, there are 4 guests and 2 cultural representatives that they are gonna interact with me in order to listen opinion and positions from 4 guests and museum directors, professionals, and curators that they are acting and working in Belgium. I'm not alone because every time this New European Bauhaus series is co-hosted and co-shared with the cultural representations in Milano, and I'm glad to welcome Cécile Flagotier, economic advisor and representative of the Wallonie-Bruxelles International in Italy, and Gert de Proost, advisor and general representative of the Flemish community in the region of Flanders in Italy. Welcome, Cécile, and welcome, Gert. I leave the stage to you to introduce our guest. Please, Cécile.
Thanks, Marco, for inviting us at the Triennale. Good evening, everybody. WBI, Wallonie-Bruxelles International, is the public agency of the Fédération Wallonie-Bruxelles, which could be compared to the Italian Ministry of Education, but only for the French-speaking community of Belgium. It promotes culture, education, research, and innovation abroad. In Italy, our offices are based in Milan, inside the Walloon Economic Bureau, which is part of the Belgian Embassy. As I don't have much time, I will just say 2 words about an unusual mission we have here in Italy. The French and the Flemish-speaking communities are members of the foundation which manages Comacina Island, which is located in the heart of Como Lake. Each year, we welcome artists and residents on the island and give them the opportunity to develop a project during their 3 weeks stay. WBI is also present in important international appointments like the Design Week in Milan and is involved in a great number of universities' collaborations. Both communities, Flemish and French-speaking, are also in charge of the management of the Belgian pavilion in Venice. But now let me introduce you briefly our speakers. We are pleased to welcome Mrs. Audrey Comtesse and Mr. Nicolaus Hirsch. Audrey Comtesse is the founding director of ICA, the Cultural Institute of Architecture Wallonia Brussels. ICA is a cultural operator of architecture that wishes to identify, analyze, publicize, and help build the architectural culture specific to the Wallonia Brussels Federation. It aims at creating a meeting place for all architecture-related professions, citizens, and commissioners. For more than 10 years, Audrey Comtesse has dedicated herself to the promotion of high-quality architecture. She was editor-in-chief of the magazine A+ Architecture in Belgium for 5 years. She also published in international architectural reviews such as L'Architecture d'aujourd'hui, Da, Werk, Bouwen plus Wonen, and so on. She was one of the co-researchers of the exhibition Usus Usur in the Belgian pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2010. And she curated exhibitions such as Unbuilt Brussels 2 and Entrée, which traveled from Paris to Geneva, London, and Montreal. Nicolas Hirsch is an architect, curator, editor, and educator. He has taught at several universities all over the world, from London to New York. His architectural work includes some prestigious honors like the award-winning Dresden Synagogue, Bockenheimer Depot Theater, and many others. Hirsch curated several international exhibitions, and he is the author of the books Institution Building, Cyber Mohala Hub, and co-editor of the Critical Special Practice series. Since 2020, he is the artistic director of the Architecture Museum SIVA in Brussels. His tenure is defined by a focus on ecology and on the urban ecosystem. It is based on a work archive and on the personal library of the Belgian biologist Paul Duvigneau, the pioneer of scientific ecology. Nicolas Hirsch's project for this year's Venice Biennale of Architecture is called 2038, which is a filmic review from 2038 to today. And now I leave the floor to my colleague Geert de Proost. Thank you.
Thank you, Cécile. Buonasera a tutti. Good avond, good evening. I'm the General Representative of Flanders to Italy, as well as to FAO and World Food Programme in Rome. And our office in Rome here is part of the Belgian embassy. But moreover, Flanders has great offices in Milan and Rome, and a tourism office in Milan as well. So Flanders, as our French-speaking colleagues, is well represented in Italy, for the simple reason that Italy is a very important partner for us in many, many ways. Probably you might have asked yourself why the Belgian webinar on the next European Bauhaus is split into two parts compared to the other European countries. The answer is straightforward and clear, because Belgium is a federal country. And for example, we don't have a national ministry for culture or education, culture and the creative industries, and many other competences belong to the responsibility of the two regions in Belgium. And in that respect, Cécile and I work a lot together. In the framework of this webinar, I would also like to mention that the biggest part of the funding from the Next Generation EU Recovery Instrument will mainly go to Flanders and Wallonia, who will spend more than the Belgian federal government on ecological, digital, and infrastructural transformations in our country. Now it's my pleasure to introduce the speakers representing Flanders at tonight's webinar, two very special guests, I may say. Sophie de Queigny is the director of Flanders Architecture Institute, and Bas Smets, landscape architect based in Brussels. Sophie is director of the Vlaams Architectuur Institute since January 2018 and lecturer in architecture critique at the Faculty of Design Sciences of the University of Antwerp. She holds a PhD from the University of Leuven in architectural history and a master's degree in cultural management from the Universitat de Barcelona. Sophie was in charge of the Heritage Department of the Flanders Architecture Institute since 2006, and she has actively collaborated on several editions of the Flanders Architectural Review and curated the exhibition Maatwerk for the German Architectural Museum Frankfurt in 2016. Since 2014, she is Secretary General of ICAM, International Confederation of Architectural Museums. And on top of all that, Sophie de Queigny is Commissioner of the Belgian Pavilion at the 17th Venice Architectural Biennial 2021. I had already a lot of conversations with Sophie in the run-up of the Venice Biennale, and we hope that the show can go on. And I also had the pleasure of working with her a couple of years ago when Sophie participated in an Archtober event, that is New York City's annual Architecture and Design Month. Our second guest from Flanders tonight is Bas Smets. And Bas has a master's degree in architecture and civil engineering from the University of Leuven and a postgraduate qualification in landscape architecture from the University of Geneva. He founded his office in Brussels in 2007 and has since constructed projects in more than 12 countries with his team of 17 architects and landscape architects. He regularly lectures at international institutions such as the Harvard University Graduate School of Design and the École Polytechnique Fédérale de Lausanne. In 2008, he was awarded the Biennial Prize for Young Landscape Architects NAJAP from the French Ministry of Culture. And in 2018, he received the award for urbanism from the French Academy of Architecture. His first monographic exhibition of his projects was co-produced by the International Arts Campus, the Singel in Antwerp, and the Arc en Rêve Center for Architecture in Bordeaux. He was appointed General Commissioner for the Biennial of Architecture of Bordeaux in 2017. I met Bas about 10 years ago when we organized in Flanders House, London, together with the Flanders Architecture Institute, a series of lectures and talks on architecture in Flanders. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Cécile, and thank you, Gerd, for the introduction. Every time we held this new European Bauhaus conversation, there's this protocol start. We like protocols also because we belong to the BAE as Triennale. We are the only cultural institution part of the Bureau International des Expositions. And since 1933, we arrange what we call Triennale, Esposizione Internazionale. And we are working on the next one, the 23rd, that will take place here in Milano from May to November 2022. And the title is Unknown Unknowns, Introduction to Mysteries. But I'm very happy to start this webinar together, and we have, let's say, the three authorities of the architectural museums and studies of Belgium, and we have a very respected professional, so we have all the ingredients to taste from different perspective and important perspective, the position on the new European Bauhaus. I'd like to start with Sophie Descagny, director of the VAI, Vlaams Architecture Institute, and I leave the floor to her, asking what was the first reaction she got when she heard about the new European Bauhaus from the European Commission. And I know that she also has a presentation to share with the screen, so I leave the stage to Sophie Descagny, please.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing my screen now, going all the way up. Sorry. Yes, so thank you very much. Welcome everybody, and thank you, Geert, for the introduction, and especially thank you, Marco, for the invitation. When your first question, what was my reaction? Well, I heard about it in the Belgian newspaper, so the entire text of Ursula von der Leyen was published, and she talks about climate change, demographic transitions, environmental and natural resources, but I think there are other enormous societal challenges that are coming towards us, and that is also the growing inequity in society and the fast digitization and control of all aspects of human life. Of course, I was happy that there was a recognition in this text of the role of architecture and design sciences, but then quite fast in the text, the idea of the new Bauhaus is put down in the Green Deal and the technology and energy. And this is, of course, important, but actually, this is what I want to plea for in this small talk. I think we should maybe think even broader and see it as a cultural project. The capacities of the design sciences of architecture, urban planning, landscape design, interior design, really have methods and capacities to both work in an analytical and at the same time a synthetical way towards these societal and environmental challenges. There are methods like research by design, who can actually, in a very prospective way, look at the future and how we can imagine this future. So also in the historical Bauhaus, this was very fundamental. It was an interdisciplinary movement that had a holistic approach. So in my plea for tonight, I would actually want to stress this idea of a holistic approach, a cultural project that actually thinks in terms of systems where everything is connected to everything. Of course, the idea of the system seems very far away, and I think that maybe Nicolaus and Bas will think about more about this change in paradigms, while I'm also questioning myself, what does it mean to architecture? Because architecture is often results in projects, in objects, architectural objects, or urban design. But how does this systematic change and this change of paradigm is related to this approach of architectural projects? And here is the cover of the book that we published last year. And this is the architectural review. And what I'm going to do now is give some examples of projects that are in this book that for me really make this or convergate the systematic change and the architectural production. So I think one of the systematic changes we have to do, we have to be more careful in using natural resources. And businesses should handle them with more care and should return them to society in a better condition. So the circular economy and the short chain production line gains importance. And here I show two projects by BC Architects Material and Studies. And they work on construction sites. They work with building materials and also to make rammed earth with a rammed earth methodology. They make new building materials. And there is both this aspect of skilling local people that live in the neighborhood, as this idea of the short chain and circularity. Of course, if you bring this to a very big scale, a bigger scale, then we also should aim for the promotion of sustainable investment in eco-welfare. And I'm convinced that this change in the system is also affecting financial institutions, and they should give priority to durable investments. Here you see a representation of a project near the Brussels North Station. That was a monofunctional modernist project, and now there is a refurbishment where in an ecological way 70% of the refurbishment is done with recycled materials, or materials will be recycled, and there will be housing, offices and public spaces. Of course, this also has to do with the aspect of meaningful work. I'm also convinced that the recognition of the importance of motivated building professional and craftsmen should augment. And this is strongly related to the idea of the productive city that is in Brussels, also a central part of the policy of the Bouwmeester. And this can lead to socially diverse cities. This could also help in this idea of the short chain in construction and construction materials. And of course, this also help skilling the community. Here you see the building. It's located in the port of Brussels, and this is very special in Brussels. The port really touches upon the center of the city, and by ship the materials, the building materials, arrive there, and then this is like a hub, and they are transported with smaller trucks. So the impact on the city is much smaller with all the construction sites in the city. Of course, we also have to think about globalization, and that's why, in a sense, I was a bit disappointed that I think the European Commission can have a huge impact on this, and it's not really touched upon in the text. We all know that the last 30 years, globalization brought a lot of welfare to the Western world, but it's not distributed equally, and also the global ecosystem is heavily damaged by it. And here I present a picture of a park in Brussels that is made by Bas Metz. Maybe Bas will elaborate more on it later. But for me, this really shows how wealth and can also be distributed in a different way, because it's the biggest park in Brussels since the 19th century. It is both very sustainable in terms of ecology, water, but also it opens up in a poor and densely populated neighborhood. It also redistributes a qualitative public space towards these neighborhoods. Another project in Ghent, where you see that bringing care, places where people can meet each other, where they have access to information, is very essential. And also this building is partly made by recovered materials and gives a decent public space in a neighborhood that is really needing for it. Housing is, of course, a central issue in this. And I also think that an idea of a new Bauhaus should also think like the historical Bauhaus did, on what is qualitative dwelling and what does it mean in the 21st century. And from what I see from my position is that housing is often an economic, seen as an economic instrument to gain profit, while actually it's a basic human right. So I think we should also shift there again, and maybe the Bauhaus is inspiring in this one. So to come to a conclusion, there is this need for system change, but on the other hand, this would also affect everyday buildings and everyday environments. And I would actually really be happy if, when you have this meeting with the European Commission, that some of the things that are in this slide, I think it needs to be something of both the public and the private sector. And also all the projects that I showed, in one or another way, they are transversal. And I think the European tendering itself, for example, in competitions, does not always facilitate this transversal way of thinking. So there is also this, critical question where if we talk about quality and change and facing these new challenges, we would need a free space where we can talk in a transversal way about all the aspects, and maybe the European tendering is not always facilitating this. I also think we should go beyond the anthropocentric perspective, and I think other of the speakers of tonight know much more about this and will talk about this. And I also think it should be a social movement, affordable, durable, and embedded in society. And then the last question, that I do have, is that when in the idea of the new Bauhaus, they talk about aesthetics, I really think it's important that the new European Bauhaus allows different formal languages for people to identify with, but also because this is not really the point. And I will end up with a short sneak peek of what we will do in the Belgian Pavilion during the 17th Venice Biennial. And it really starts with how will we live together? And it was the curatorial invitation. One of the big differences, I think, with the new Bauhaus is that we cannot start from the tabula rasa like it was in the interwar period. We have to deal with what there's already there with the tabula scripta. So circularity, reuse, having empathy for the context is very important. So all the projects that we will show in a three-dimensional model are all projects that actually breed for me this systematic change. They are all very generous. Most of them are the result of this intervention by Bouwmeesters and quality chambers. So they all have this transdisciplinary generosity towards society, and will make a model landscape out of it. And I really like to invite you all to come and see it. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Sophie De Cagny, for your presentation. You touched many points that were also shared by other contributors in the previous episodes. Let me underline just a few of them. the necessity of a systemic change and the necessity of a political support. The appointment we have with the European Commission on April 13th is just to advise them that there are already existing networks and many epicenters in Europe, like museums, universities that are already working, also biennales and triennales on this topic, and they want to bring this to the attention of the politicians in order to consider and start from a tabula scripta, as you said, that is already been written by researchers, and they are there to advise the politician and the bureaucracy that is in somehow working on a legislation that is in many occasions too far from what the society needs. The diversity and the empathy for the context is also another important aspect. And when you mention the public and the private sector, we often invited, this is not the case of the Belgium episode, also to have entrepreneurs with us, because when we talk about design, architecture, we also know that they involve the economic sphere and many other aspects that they are often touching, not just the cultural policies or what we think it's a topic for museums talks, but they affect the entire society. So thank you very much for your contribution. And I ask now to Audrey Comtesse, Director of the Institut Culturel d'Architecture Wallonie-Bruxelles, to share their presentation, and we are looking forward to listen to her speech.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for the introduction too. Thank you, Sophie, for your first proposition. I think that my proposition will be very linked to it. Do you see the screen? Okay?
Yes, we see the screen and we hear you very well.
Perfect. My first reaction to the new European Bauhaus was one of enthusiasm, of course, because statements of the European Commission that involved architectural culture are so rare. I also find a real echo in the ICA Institute that we started 2 years ago, and which is based on the Davos Declaration of 2018 that wanted to spread a high quality Baukultur in Europe. Our institute wishes to promote the construction of a highlight built environment and a sense of community living. It also wants to create a meeting place for all the architecture-related professions, citizens, and commissioners, since they are all actors and users of the territory. I think that, the legacy of Bauhaus especially makes sense in Belgium, with the figure of Henri van der Velde and the creation of the School of La Cambre in 1926. But knowing that the Commission picks up this rather romantic idea of Bauhaus, we also have to realize that we are right now experiencing the limitations of that idea. The Bauhaus intention of changing our way of thinking that was innovative then, but outdated now. For it is the reinterpretation of these ideas over time that causes the current problems of spatial planning. Repetition of constructive elements, extreme economic logics, overabundance of standards linked to the lobbying of the construction industry. The current innovative paradigm is about the circularity of materials and production. It is about constructing cities as a continuing process rather than a conception of green fields and unbuilt spaces. Reinventing a way of living together is not about communication and branding. It is not just about rebranding a worn out style or city. It is a process that goes very much deeper into the fabric of architectural production itself. I don't know if you...
We are actually seeing the first chart of your
Yes.
presentation.
Which is... let me... so no. Voilà. Okay, sorry about that.
Because it seems you have difficulties to flip the slides or...
Yeah.
Okay, now we see the second one.
Okay, sorry. So yes, it's really a process that goes much deeper into the fabric of architectural production itself. And that is why I've chosen this image of the Belgian pavilion in 2010, curated by Rotor. Usure was the first major step for this collective in developing their current critique on the industrialized architectural production. It also changed the way we looked at materials. Rotor diverted the usual codes of the architectural or art exhibition to introduce us to this new paradigm of reuse in architecture. Your second question, Marco, was about finding other contributions and expertise to reinforce the new European Bauhaus project. Well, I think that if the goal is to build a new future together, we have to include the inhabitants or citizens. Since Corona forced us into lockdown, we are experiencing a very particular moment. From our institute's point of view, we are seeing in our daily practice that citizens are more than ever concerned about the quality of their built and unbuilt environment. For these citizens, talking about architecture is talking about space, about materials, about ecology, about feelings, and it's not about aesthetics or style. And they have a lot to say. They understand a global and holistic approach to their environments, and they understand that architecture is at the center of it. Together with the Flanders Architecture Institute and the CIVA, we launched an open call for ideas in May 2020. Under the title Desired Spaces, we gave the opportunity to everybody to express their dreams about a new space to live in. Victor Sell sent us this image. I choose it because I think it is very much linked to the new European Bauhaus. It represents a utopian place to live called Pudaka, which includes culture and nature, which tell us something about living outside as well as inside, and which connects with a very wide diversity of cultural references. I would like to finish with a few questions. How will this experimentation be translated into policy? And how will we avoid that this experimentation will be turned to recipes, turned into rules, or even worse, into norms? As we all know, an overload of norms, a typically European disease, can not only kill the quality of our built environments, but also the work and inventiveness of architects. And why are we not talking about the quality of space and architecture in the new Green Deal? Why is it that pragmatism seems to make any reflection on architectural quality disappear. I also wonder how the European Commission will overcome its own organization in separate compartments to make this new European Bauhaus happen. What kind of links will be made between the new European Bauhaus and the European Committee for Architectural Policy, an organization that already connects the professionals to the culture and the political worlds of architecture? Or between the new European Bauhaus and the work of the architectural group of open method of coordination, which already brings to light study cases which promote qualitative environments. These questions remind me of the Belgian pavilion in Venice when it was occupied in 2018 by an installation of the young team of Trois Novelle and Roxane Legrel. The installation Eurotopie referred to the Agora of ancient Greece and was painted in the same blue as the European Union's flag. It turned the pavilion into a forum for debate, a forum for discussion about the future of Europe and about how architects can help build the European democratic space. Well, let's offer the space to the think and do tank of the new European Bauhaus.
Thank you very much, Audrey, for raising these very pivotal questions. In your presentation, we heard about reuse, including citizens, and we heard also about this fantastic word that is utopia, for mainly, especially in this specific pandemic time, we need to think in a different way, because if the paradigm is changing, probably we need to other cultural references in order to build a new one or a better one. Also, the warnings you just shared, that we don't want that this experimentation turns into norms or something that it won't work. As good policies is also a very important advice that we need to bring to the attention to the European Commissions. And I will promise Triennale is going to do that. And I also want to mention the Baukultur statement in Davos in 2018. It's also part of a reflection that Triennale is starting with the network of Europa Nostra, and we are working on it for a new symposium that we are going to arrange in late April. So we are going to also tackle that topic. Next is Nikolaus Ersch, Artistic Director of the Chiva in Brussels. And after all this contribution, I'd like to hear from Nikolaus Ersch his perspective in terms of systemic change and how this platform, in his opinion, has to embrace all the diversities that before now Sophie and Audrey just mentioned, when we think about public and private, beyond the Anthropocene and all the diversities that we need to embrace. Nikolaus Ersch, to you, please.
Yeah, many thanks, Marco, and to everybody for the invitation. To maybe tackle directly your question about systemic change, I think it's a recurring term, and I wonder a bit, it's a very big word, and I wonder what is the role of architects, landscape architects, designers, and also of institutions like ours in this aim, or to actually address this aim. It seems to me very ambitious, not wrong, but very ambitious. We at CIVA have probably the privilege in a way to have in our collection the work of Paul Dovigneau, who has been one of the pioneers of one of the key words that we have been hearing constantly, which is circularity, or kind of cyclic approaches to these new challenges, or old challenges, if you wish. And but to a certain extent, this very work, which is very often based on diagrams, a lot of research, a lot of numbers, which is basically also the language of many scientists who investigate these dramatic changes in the environment. I think they also show some problems, I guess, in terms of communicating what we're doing or what the challenge is. Basically, these diagrams are also very abstract. They have often a lack of tangibility. These processes are, to a certain extent, intangible. And it's a bit like what we once in a project at eFlux called accumulation, what we said, I think the first sentence of our editorial was, the climate is not the weather. So everybody can talk about the weather because it's either sunshine or it's raining, etc. But the climate is something very different. You need another vocabulary to understand it, what the climate is. And I think this is, to me, also some of the challenges to change together, whether it's institutions or practitioners, these perceptions. Because I think Sophie talked in the beginning a lot about this fetish on objects. And I think this is one of the problems, that we are still in a phase of this kind of fetishization of objects. And I think it's really a different kind of perception is needed. And this is maybe where also cultural institutions can play a role, because that's, in a way, historically speaking, what we're good in. And another aspect of this is certainly also how to address, besides the question of circularity, the question of materials. I think this is also something we can, material research, where we can actually have a word. And there are people who really ask for dramatic changes in the literal sense. For instance, one could mention this, I think, brilliant essay or pamphlet by Mark Jasenbeck, the historian and theorist from MIT, who talked about the end of the quadrivium, meaning the end of the materials that were really driving modernism: concrete, steel, glass, and rubber. So what about these challenges in a way? So, and of course, this almost sounds too big as a word, systemic change. But if we think back about, for instance, the heroic modernism of the 1920s, for instance, and there is, of course, the reference to the Bauhaus, but I think it's actually not a very good one. It's a very striking one that works very well, I think, in terms of communication. But of course, Gropius, I think he is partly responsible for this focus on objects. He was a brilliant marketer of the Bauhaus, but of course, at the same time, there were other people like Martin Wagner in Berlin or Ernst May in Frankfurt who were trying much harder to have a really inclusive and very broad systemic approach. And because, for instance, at the New Frankfurt in 1920s, and I'm not saying this because I was based, and I'm still based partly in Frankfurt, but this was a very transdisciplinary group with landscape designers and really reformers like Lebrecht Migge, or the kitchen planner Margarete Schütte-Lihotzky, many brilliant architects, or typographers. The Futura was invented as the new typography for Frankfurt at that time. So which I think that's a really interesting example in showing a very broad approach. And maybe one other element which is quite obvious in examples like Frankfurt and others, globally speaking, is the importance of bureaucracy, because I think it's very easy to blame bureaucracy for a lot of things from the perspective of a cultural producer, but I would argue it's too easy. I would actually argue, and that's a bit maybe something you might see in our contribution for the Venice Biennale, our project 2038. Like from the perspective of 2038, because we're talking about a review, we would actually hope for a radical bureaucracy, because only by radicalizing certain potentials that bureaucracy has, we can actually have a systemic change. So architects or designers being implied in legislation is actually not something bad. It's maybe what's needed. It's certainly not what I have learned in university, because what I have learned in university in the architectural school is that bureaucracy is the enemy. But I think this co-produced the problems in which we find ourselves. And that's, I think, legislation is, in my eyes, one of the keys. And there are a lot of things changing right now in the environmental sphere. Just to name maybe one last example, the environment is not just for humans, as we know, it's also for non-humans. So the multi-species element or also natural elements are crucial here. So there are, for instance, there's this river in New Zealand, the Wanganui River, which I think in 2019 received the legal rights of a subject. That's unimaginable, I think, for a few years ago, to imagine that a river would have legal rights like we as humans. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Nikolaos. You also brought to the attention of the audience and to this conversation a lot of important topics. I mean, this new, starting from the last one, the necessity to write or rearrange a new alliance with the legislation, it's fundamental. I mean, if we start like building a wall between us and with the lawmakers, this is going to be very difficult. Also to imagine that the legislation has to reconsider the entities, which are not just us as communities, but also new elements, new species, and you mentioned the river in New Zealand, but also other communities that they don't have representations in sovereign countries. For example, the Triennale is working with the Roman Sinti community to have for the first time a pavilion of them as a national country in the upcoming Triennale. I also would like to refer to this end of the quadrivium important point, because the material research, it is also something that the European Bauhaus statement was mentioning in terms of energy consumption and the new standards, but the end of the quadrivium is much more, because is effect in the way of you conceive a space, an interior, and its quality when you live in it. And this gives me the chance to go to the last contributor, to the landscape architect, Bas Smets. I leave it to you, Bas, in order to hear how you build an environment without quadrivium.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation. So I'm a landscape architect and I build landscapes. So my feet on the ground, trying to put plants in it and make them grow. So if you don't mind, I would like to take you on a trip to 3 projects and use a project to speak about the systemic change that has been mentioned by the other speakers. Because I do believe that this new Bauhaus is the opportunity to think about a new landscape that works both for humans and for plants and for animals, but a new landscape that we need in the man-made environment in which we live and which more and more covers this earth. So it's, I would say, a little trip into the possibilities of landscape. So I prepared a little presentation.
Thank you, Bas. While you open the presentation, I can ask to open the chat for possible questions after Bas' contribution.
Yes, and so I would like you to take you on a trip to Brussels, Paris, and London, into every time a more sophisticated landscape. The Brussels one, oh, and actually no, I want to start with 2 personalities that I think will be key or could be key in the future. Alexander von Humboldt who explored the Americas and was really trying to understand how things work, how latitude compares with altitude, with humidity, with air pressure, with the blueness of the sky. And so in these famous drawing and scientific measures of the Chimborazo, he's trying to understand the world in which we live. And I think we have to do this with a landscape or man-made landscape or city or built environment or whatever you call it, the way we transform this planet. We create a new type of climate, a new type of landscape that we should understand. And by understanding it, we will be able to act within it. And that's why I want to put von Humboldt next to Viollet-le-Duc, who you might know for the renovations of big churches in France, among which Notre Dame, but who also was a fervent hiker, and for 10 years he would go to the Mont Blanc, redrawing the Mont Blanc, understanding the Mont Blanc, glaciers, rock formations, but also repairing them. And for him, there was no difference in repairing a mountain as there would be in repairing a chateau or a church. And I think with the kind of search for comprehension that von Humboldt had, with the kind of search for let's say technical understanding of how something works, and then repairing or making things that Viollet-le-Duc has, I think we can come up with new landscapes. And so I'll walk you through them quite quickly. One is in Brussels, and Sophie de Cagny already mentioned it, in Tour and Taxis, where actually we made a landscape based on the reading of the topography, understanding that the flat area that we were working in was the result of railroad tracks that had been built, and that we had to make a new landscape with absolutely no money. So we used plants to make the earth better. We used clover to enrich the soil, so that over time, it's a kind of evolutive landscape. A park produces itself. And this was really done by scraping off layers that had been added by man over time, by filtering these layers and by reusing them to store rainwater underneath, as you can see in these slides, and to really make a park that I would call an augmented landscape that is part of the development, since we store all the rainwater, all the stormwater underneath these lawns. And we have, I think I have it here, we have pioneer trees growing quickly into this heavy soil, while slower growing trees take over time. So I would say using the logics of nature to produce a landscape rather than trying to imitate an image of a landscape. And I think it's really key that in that sense, nature cannot be a background. It's not the 19th century l'embellissement des villes. We're not there anymore. We're into a systemic change where landscape needs to perform. It needs to perform its ecosystem services. And it can do that in an easy or in a not so difficult way the moment you understand how it works. So this is Brussels. And we go to Paris, to La Défense, another man-made landscape, if you like, built on an esplanade, on a higher platform, in the continuity of the axis of Le Nôtre, ending with the La Grande Arche that you might know, and the Knit. And here in between, there's a little road. I'll show it you here. This is the Knit. And a developer had found a way of putting in, I think, about 1,000 foundation pillars on which he wanted to build a new skyscraper. And we won the competition to imagine 4,000 of square meters of hardscape around that tower. Hardscape, of course, floating on top of an urban boulevard. And this, just like Brussels reminded me of a tributary, this area reminded me of the Mont Blanc, where all the skyscrapers would reflect the light as a glacier would. The staircases, the height differences reminded me of avalanches. And I was just wondering, where's the tree line? In every mountain, there's a tree line, meaning the altitude above which no trees grow. And so imagined, could we add a tree line to the La Défense skyline? And so we were thinking of how do trees grow? How much earth do they need? And how thin can we make a slab in which a tree still grows? And so we worked on volume rather than depth. we work to tree nurseries to prepare these trees so they have flat root balls, so they have a big volume of root balls, but they're not too high. And so we managed to plant trees in about 52 centimeters, but spread over 4,000 square meters. So in the end, we have 2,000 cubic meters of soil and a special system so the slabs don't compress the soil. So it's a bit technical, but in the end, from an understanding of how trees can grow, we can make new types of landscape for this man-made environments. And so the same here, I had the obligation to plant 9 trees. That was the official obligation. We planted about 100 without any composition. The only composition was maximum number of trees. And so in a kind of interesting way, the fire truck access, the accessibility for all these constraints that limit the project became, I read them as if they would have been natural constraints, like the fire truck access could have been an underground aquifer that doesn't allow me to plant trees. So the final result is almost natural, dealing with artificial circumstances. So I'll show you this. So this is finished just now. You can see the trees that have been there now for about 2 years, and that create this line of trees within this mountainous situation of La Défense. Here you see, and they've only just been planted, so give it 2-3 more years and you'll really read a tree line within these glaciers of buildings. And the final one I would like to share with you is not this one. Let me see. Okay, I made a middle mistake because I have to go to another presentation. If you bear with me for a second. The last one is in London. And here we're in a courtyard. Just 1 second, so I'll get there. Okay, here it is. Check. Switch. Check. All right, we're in a courtyard. You see my screen, right, with the courtyard?
We see your screen in the courtyard.
Okay, thank you. No, because I switched presentation. We're in a courtyard of a former office building turned into a hotel. And here, there was no possibility of putting any vegetation on the deck. But we read the climatic conditions. And since it was a hotel, since there was a restaurant, there was a bar, there was a lot of doors opening up. We understood that it was a microclimate created by man again, and that temperatures within the courtyard were about 3 to 4 degrees higher than on the street. We're in Fitzrovia, in the center of London, right next to the British Museum. And so we understood it would hardly freeze there. So we could plant different types of trees. And then we had a whole negotiation with the architects of providing structural soil within the beams. So we redrew the supporting beams of the galleries around the rooms. And within this section, everything was solved, from lighting to humidity detection to irrigation, structural soil, plants coming out. And we planted about 500 climbing trees within these beams that were concealed in the railings, so that looking from above or from below, it seemed that plants would climb over 10 meters over 3-4 floors of the courtyard. And so this has become a very successful project for the client. We won the prize for a world best landscaping of a hotel or whatever. But so very interestingly, everybody told us we would not succeed, but we succeeded because we read the climatic conditions of that space. And again, and that's why I want to end, referring back to both Viollet-le-Duc and Alexander von Humboldt, the moment we understand better the man-made environment that we have made and that we are making, we can reintroduce nature. I mean, we pushed out nature because nature was dangerous back in the days. We have to reintroduce it, understanding the environment that we have created and finding the right solutions using the logics of nature and imitating those logics into the environment that we have created for ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you to you, Bas, and this way of like repairing and understanding the environment and trying to mimic a logic that is not the usual logic is also the way we should think and approach also a wider project as the new European Bauhaus. We are running out of time because the conversation is to last for 1 hour, and we already so I leave very briefly to Gerd and Cecile few remarks, or few a statement to the audience if they want to pick up an element or comment or something that they heard during the conversation, and then I will end with some instructions and elements for our followers. Cecile?
Okay, thank you. I can say that the words that I can remember is reuse, sustainability, circular economy. So I think that we have a big work to do and that we are facing the biggest challenge, environment and social challenge of all times. So I think that our regions, our communities, the Belgian communities are still aware of that challenge. And circular economy is the priority of our communities. So I think that, that we will win the challenge, I think so, but we will have to work hard and a lot.
Thank you, Cecile. Gerd?
Yeah, thank you, Marco, for hosting this event, and all the speakers for their inspiring talks and ideas that it produced. Referring to what Nicolaus said on bureaucracy and legislation, yes, there is a lot of work to do, and Flanders has a great interest, of course, in this EU proposal in particular. We are working on our own recovery plans towards these transitions when it comes to ecological, digital solutions and transitions. But I wanted to mention that Belgium will be chairing, the president of the EU in the first half of 2024. And we have already started the preparations. And in particular, Flanders and Wallonia, the French-speaking community, will be in charge of these challenges and will be tabling and working on legislation to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerd. Of course, I'd like to thank all the guests, and to quote Cecile, I have a long list of words that you shared with us that they are very important. And just to mention Nicolaus, when he said about the archive, the collection, and what an institution can do, it's also dealing with history and with elements that they are part of its history, and reinsert this history in a cultural cycle that can help to recalculate the way we look at the world. And this was also part of Bas' conversation statement when he quote Viollet-le-Duc and Alexander von Humboldt on measuring the Mont Blanc. Regarding the Sophie Descagny and Audrey Comtesse statements, there's a few elements that are very important to me and that I will bring to the bigger debate with the European Commission in April, is the carefulness in using materials and also the greater attention to care, to health, to wealth, and to materials. These are just few food for thoughts that they've been shared by all of you, and I would like to thank you very much for your contribution. You've been very, very straightforward, and it was very, very interesting for me, for Triennale, and for all the followers that they've been very, very were a lot tonight with us. Thank you very much.